Today on Substance Stories, we're going to be talking about how important a healthy identity is to your journey in recovery. Today, we're back on Substance Stories with Nathan Akoka. Nathan, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you, Rich. Thanks for having me. How are you going?
Fantastic. Fantastic now that you're here back with me. It's been so many weeks, Nathan. I thought you were running away from me.
Thought I'd give you a break, Richard.
We want to talk about something I think that's pretty close to both of our hearts, Nathan, which is identity and its role in recovery. So I want to start off with a sort of broad discussion about what identity is and then talk about how important it is in recovery. So I'll refer to Kierkegaard, who I often refer to in my daily conversations with you. And his view on what is identity and what is the self. He said, the self is a relation that relates to itself, or is the relations relating itself to itself in the relation. The self is not the relation, but is the relation's relation itself to itself. And I think that fills me with understanding about what the self is. But for those of us that couldn't follow Kierkegaard, Nathan, what is the self and what is identity?
So, look, I suppose for me, identity is really, your own relationship with yourself, how you view yourself and your self-concept. And the things that impact that could be a range of things. It could be from your own beliefs. It could be from your own behavior. I suppose the way you relate to other people, and then how you might view and make a judgment on how you relate to other people feeds back into your self-concept, right?
Yeah.
And the way that you relate to yourself and view yourself will impact how you behave and relate to other people. So for me, it's just really, it really comes down to how you see yourself and see the different parts of you.
Yeah, it's like Soren Kierkegaard's back in the room with me, mate. Yeah, I agree completely. I think it is. It's a very amorphous construct, right? It's hard to nail down, but at the end of the day, it's who we are and who we see ourselves are. What I really like is sort of there's this guy like Russell Mears, sort of Hobson and Mears, that did the sort of conversational model, or even the sort of the ideas of the self, William James, that sort of thing. That our self isn't actually entirely within us. It's in between us and whoever we are with. So our self is actually outside our body. It's this image that we have of the world and it's affected by the world. And it changes depending on the setting and it changes over time. And that's healthy. We shouldn't have this very rigid view of ourselves. It is appropriate for me to be different on this podcast than I am at home, than I am at work, that I am with my friends. But it's still important that I have a consistent version of me between them. So that when you chat to me at work and we're being silly, and you chat to me here and hopefully I'm being a bit more formal, it feels still like me, but it's a little bit different, and I think that is the key idea of the self. The other key thing for me is a healthy self and a healthy identity is made up of multiple pieces. So I think of my identity, myself, as a jigsaw puzzle. And each little piece makes me. And so the one thing I get very worried about when I talk to people is when there is, I talk to them and they're like, myself is Harry Potter. And all they want to talk to me about is Harry Potter. And I think, Harry Potter is a good book series or movie series or whatever. But I would like there to be more aspects to you, And so when someone says, who are you, Nathan? Hopefully you don't just say, well, I'm a psychologist. Hopefully you have a lot more to you.
Sometimes I like to run.
Really, you haven't mentioned that before, that you like to run. Yeah. And I think that's it. I think a healthy identity is built with many pieces and we piece ourselves together. And from that, it's sort of, it's adjustable, it's robust, but it is this complete sense of self. So we sort of covered what is identity, perhaps. Why is it important in addiction recovery?
There's a few things I'll touch on, and I think, first of all, and we were speaking about this the other day, I think it's really important to acknowledge, um, you know, we say that identity is how we view ourselves, and that's often tied into our behavior. It might drive our behavior. And for some people, we need to acknowledge that um, they're they might idolize, they might have a positive view of who they are when they're using substances. And I see this a lot,
Yeah.
especially working with, you know, young people. So if we think about stages of development, people often are, integrating and forming a sense of self, when they're in early adolescence, and it continues on and on and on, right? And if someone had a chronic kind of, chronic substance use since adolescence, they might have been a bit of a shy kid. They might have been really anxious. They might have walked into a party and there's a girl there they want to chat to, and they're full of anxiety, and someone's like, "Mate, have this drink or have this bump of this cocaine," and they have that, and then all of a sudden, all that
Mm.
anxiety and fear just goes away, and they walk in and they're the life of the party, and they're actually able to function and be this version of themselves that they actually idolize and want to be. Um, that then their kind of sense of identity that they want to be is fused with the drugs and alcohol.
Mm.
Um, so I think it's really important to address that maybe when they are trying to come into recovery, and we're almost working with them to take away a part of their identity that they actually like and value, they're going to feel empty. And often we hear people say, "I feel really empty when I'm not using." It's like part of me is gone that I really like. Now the anxiety's back, the fear's back, the irritability's back. So I think it's really important, if we're going to take something away that might, have a positive aspect of their identity. It might have other parts that are not so positive, like shame if they relapse, but we need to acknowledge there are some positive parts of it that they might have, and kind of work with them to build that up in a more in a more helpful way, if that makes sense. So for me, that's
Oh,
one of the first starting points, is acknowledging that.
absolutely. And you were talking about young people, but I also see it a lot in sort of older people.
Yeah.
So, sort of like a guy in the 60s, 70s that is hearkening back to this time of his life when he was young and went out and had a life.
Yeah.
And now, that time is gone, as it is for me. But you are very much, I'm assuming, Nathan, still young and very vital. But I think that is it's a huge thing
Mm.
to, how could you separate this, this substance use from a period of your life when you felt different, especially if you've had a lot of loss, in later in your life, and you're trying to sort of, it reminds you of that time. Yeah.
100%. And I think, like, you can even break it down if it's more relatable to if people on the kind of show are thinking about like alcohol, and like, you know, people that might not have an addiction that are listening to this show, walking, if you're going to a work function and you're, a bit tight, and you just have a drink because you're like, I want to loosen up, and I don't want to be really tight at my work function, or I'm going on this date and I'm a bit nervous. I just want to have a drink,
Hmm.
and you're like, oh, I performed really well at this kind of date or this work function. It's like your
Yeah.
idolized identity, or like, becomes tied into that. Then you start thinking, this comes back to your identity. I'm actually not that fun unless I drink, so that becomes part of your identity. Um, yeah. And even as well with like, coffee, if people think about that, or caffeine, for me, people, someone in my circle at the run club says to me, when I have enough caffeine, my alter ego comes out, and I'm like, kind of the life of wherever I am. So like that comes back into my identity. Sometimes, I'm flat unless I'm having caffeine. That's not always true, but like that does feed back into part of your identity. It's like
Oh.
it becomes contingent. And um, the first thing, I suppose, once again, is acknowledging that.
Oh, I mean, coffee is a classic example of something that has worked its way into people's identity, right? Someone will openly say, "Oh, I'm a coffee snob." I can't drink coffee from that cafe because I know, and that happens with wine all the time, doesn't it? Oh, and how can I, if I have an alcohol use disorder and I therefore cannot have wine, but being a wine connoisseur is one of my identities, is a huge thing to move away from, right? And we think about how we idealize the sort of, especially men, the sort of hyper masculine, James Bond is always drinking. He's never drunk, but he's always drinking. And we're, this is a pinnacle of masculinity that we are striving towards. And it's so hard to say goodbye to that sort of part of our identity.
Of course. And like, I'm just reflecting as well on like, because yeah, we have this identity of maybe how we act in context of using our substance, but also, like, I think what you're saying is part of the identity is also just having the drink there. So for me, I reflect, and I personally don't drink till I've gone through my own experience. And I'm just reflecting on going to, like, people's houses, like with their kind of grandparents that are a bit more old school, and they're like, "You gonna have a beer with us tonight, mate, or have a glass of scotch?" I'm like, "No, I don't drink." I'm a non-drinker because what I've done is I'm not saying, "Oh, I'm not drinking," but then I'm not drinking at the moment says maybe part of my identity is I do drink, but right now I'm trying to not do that. But I'll say, because I'm owning that as part of my identity is, I'm a non-drinker, and they look at me like, "What?" Like, like, "You're not kicking back with the boys here
Mm.
and the men and having a glass of scotch or a beer?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a non-drinker." You know, I say it in a very kind of assertive way, um,
Yeah.
that I'm kind of sure of my identity, but it's like, it's a shock because, yeah, we have to, it is kind of part of that identity for some people is being a man, or, you have a beer or you have a drink, for some people it's, they see themselves as a bit bougie and a bit upper class, yeah, I'm gonna open a glass of wine tonight, and sit by the fire and, have a glass of wine with my steak because, that's the type of person I am, it becomes part of your identity, like who you are in context of even, engaging with that drink. Yeah.
Especially with illicit drugs, what you were saying is, I don't want to be the party pooper. There's almost this, it's like we're school children and we're doing something a bit naughty, like we're sneaking out or something. And it's the one that says, oh, hang on, the parents wouldn't want us to do this. Often how people respond when it's an illicit drug is like, oh, why are you being the party pooper? It's almost like you not engaging is making a comment on them, you know, which is attacking their identity. And I think that's where a lot of the resistance sometimes to someone saying, "Oh, I don't drink," comes from. Not so much why does it matter that you don't drink, but it's a reflection on my identity that I am drinking or I am using drugs that you don't drink, and that's what people are responding to negatively.
Mm. Uh,
And so I think identity plays a huge role.
yeah, and you know, when you talk about the jigsaw puzzle, for me, what I often talk about is like I'll draw up a pie, like, a pie chart, and I'll say it's just a piece of the pie. You know what I mean? Like if someone says I'm an absolute failure, they've internalized their kind of relapse or
Mm.
their inability to abstain with I'm a failure, and they see their whole identity as, dragged through the mud. I'm no good. My identity is just trash.
Mm.
I am a failure. It's not that I am not achieving my goals and failing at my goals, which is a behavioral thing. Is I view my self concept as a failure. My identity is a failure.
I think what you were describing there, this idea that we can internalize our external failures, is really summed up excellently by Martin Seligman's concept of learned helplessness. And that's when we're put in an unwinnable position, um, eventually we internalize that. Our repeated failures, even if it's a no-win situation, a Kobayashi Maru, we take that on board as us. Um, and I like to think of the opposite of learned helplessness as this concept of mastery. And that's what I spend a lot of time talking with my patients about is about building up their sense of self-efficacy, their sense that they can do things. And the best way to do that is through this concept of mastery. And this concept of mastery is essentially the better I get at one thing, that sort of leaks out and I think I can do everything. So my classic example is I don't know if anyone's ever had the pleasure of talking to a surgeon at a dinner party, but what's important to keep in mind about a surgeon is that they're good at one thing, and that's cutting people open. And only a very specific sort of cutting people open. But if you sit next to a surgeon at a dinner party, they will tell you their views on economics, politics, genuinely your job, probably, genuinely everything that they have no idea about, because that's leaked. That idea or that sense of mastery has leaked. And what's great to learn from our narcissistic surgeon friends is that we can internalize that. So if I get good at one thing, say in Nathan's case, running, right? Nathan is, I don't want to spill the beans, but a phenomenal runner. I think he ran 100 kilometers for fun last weekend, which is, I think, a form of torture for most other people. That leaks. His excellent running ability makes him feel he's better at all sorts of things, which I'm sure Nathan is because he's amazing. But other people wouldn't be, and we get this sense of belief in ourselves, this self-efficacy, this sense that we can do things. I always think about when I was an intern, I started my master's degree in addiction studies. And I remember talking to my now wife and saying, I can't do this. This is postgraduate. It's too much for me. And then, really struggling through that first semester. And then 3 years later, I was doing that master's degree. I was doing another master's degree. I was studying from a psychiatry exam all the time, working full time. I could just do it because I'd internalized that belief. I'd gotten that mastery. And it's so important. This idea of ourselves as a competent person, this identity that we can do things and we are capable of doing things is so important in addiction recovery.
It's so true what you're saying, and it really feeds it feeds our behavior and our kind of drive and limits that kind of sense of fear. For me, it's like what you're saying, I can totally relate to because I remember when I was doing my undergrad, I wasn't a big fan of stats. I had this belief that I'm not good at stats and that how am I going to even consider masters or honors or even PhD wasn't even like a doctorate, but wasn't even something I consider. Um, because that was part of my identity that I just can't do it. I'm not good enough to do that, not smart enough. And then slowly over mastering, like doing well in my undergrad, then doing well in the honors, um, that built my self-efficacy and that mastery, that belief that, a part of my identity is that maybe I am good enough to do this. I'm not a failure at this, and now I feel comfortable lecturing that or even tutoring, taking those roles. But if I didn't view my self-concept and my identity as being able to do that through my past behavior of doing well enough, I would have never considered doing a master's or a PhD or lecturing. I think why would people want to listen to me? I'm no good at this, But through
Yeah.
those experiences build our part of our identity. They build those kind of bits of the jigsaw puzzle. Yeah.
And now you've reached the ultimate in white guy narcissism, which is being on a podcast.
Yeah, I
So,
know, mate. Tell me about it. um,
so
yeah,
I think to the next thing I'm going to sort of think what we were going to talk about is about how important it is to pin our identity to a behavior change we want to
yeah.
do. So do you want to talk about that a bit?
In our identity or behavior change we want to do. So, um, yeah. So I suppose like I talk a bit about this as well in the sense of if we think about like the 12 steps as well, right? Like, you know,
Yeah.
um, people talk about this concept of, reclaiming their identity as I'm an addict and that keeps me vigilant, which is
Yeah.
controversial, because some people say, this is not me. Like, I think this takes me away from the identity I want, reclaiming, saying I'm an addict, that's reinforcing that. And I want to move past that identity. So I don't like the NA or the 12 steps or, I'm an alcoholic, that concept. But for some people, reclaiming that leads them to being vigilant in behavior change, But if that kind of makes sense. But for me, what I think is important, which is coming back to your question, is if you're going to reclaim I'm an addict, that keeps you vigilant in recovery, which I think for a lot of people works really well. I think it's really individual. So if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, let's talk about something else. But I think you have to have other parts of that jigsaw instead of just being I'm an addict, or you'll be limited in your behavior
Yeah.
change. So, for example, you know, let's say it is, I'm an academic, if that's your kind of role, if you want to strive towards becoming an academic, I am the training academic, or for you, I'm the training psychiatrist. Like, when you're training, I am a psychiatrist in training, instead of saying I'm a person that, you know, is just trying to get through and I'm doing a bit of study, but claiming that, I'm an, I- you know, I'm a training psychiatrist. It's actually internalizing that kind of behavior to keep reinforcing that behavior, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So, yeah.
So if I pin my identity to
Yeah.
something, I will then keep to it. So if I say I'm a party boy, I'm the life of the
Yeah.
party, it's going to be really hard for me to stop using drugs and alcohol. But if I say I am a healthy guy and my quest is to be healthy, I'm going to work a lot harder. I think about it a lot. So when I was 22, 23, I got hectically into the gym. I would go to the gym an hour and a half a day, 3 to 4 times a week. And that was my identity. And I remember saying like, oh, I won't have any ice cream ever. And then I developed in my medical career and I got busier and I went to the gym less. And now it's no longer part of my identity. I still go to the gym, but I don't have that drive. Often, my trainer or my coworker outerer will say, oh, you got 3 more pull-ups in you. And I'm like, man, I just don't have that dog in me, because it's not part of my identity anymore to go that hard. Like you got that dog in you, Nathan. And that's because your identity is that you're a runner, right? I couldn't run 100K. I'd run 1K and be like, I'm going home, it's no longer part of my identity to be and I think that's it, is that we need to, if we want to stake sobriety and abstinence, we want that happy
Yeah.
life. We need to make it part of our identity. So we need to get comfortable with the explanation. It's not just, I'm not drinking tonight, as you said earlier. It's, I don't drink.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be, I don't drink because I have a problem with alcohol or because I have a problem with addiction. It can be if that's what you're comfortable with, but it has to be a affirmative statement of, I don't drink. And what I think is poorly communicated with this is that that's actually a really cool and confident thing to be. So the people I think I admire the most in my life are people that are in long-term recovery who live this incredibly authentic and open and confident life. You know, I'm often talking to someone at a party or at work or at my social life, and I'm thinking, you know, they say, you know, I've been this much recovery, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and I'm just in awe of how confident and open this person is. So I think we really need to say, in order to achieve recovery, you need to make recovery your identity, but making recovery your identity is an incredibly cool and handsome and sexy thing to be. You know, it's not a vulnerable, oh, you know, I have a problem sort of thing. It's this, I have a problem, that we all have problems. I'm owning it and I'm in control of it and I'm living this sort of authentic life. And that's what I find really exciting about a lot of my job, is I get to spend so much time hanging out with people in long-term recovery, and it's great. And that's the image I think we need to project. I mean, there are so many people that run 12-step groups that I think are the most electric, sort of magnetic people I've ever met, you know, and that's what draws people into recovery in 12 steps. You know, you go to your first meeting and you meet someone that is just owns the room, you know, and I think that only comes with this sort of super authentic lifestyle.
Yeah. Totally agree. Because they, yeah, like you said, they own it. And for me, like, that's not just vulnerable and wish-washy. That is, that takes a lot of courage and power, um, and the ability just to back yourself in general, to be like, I'm not actually a sheep. I'm not gonna undermine myself, my
Yeah.
goals, my values, just to have a little drink and get kind of fearful when I have to say, oh, maybe I won't tonight because, usually I want to do what everyone else
Mm.
does. I'm actually doing something a bit different and backing myself because I want something better in my life. I don't care if I'm a bit different. I am a non-drinker, and saying that's part of your identity. I'm not trying to not drink tonight, make up excuses. It's not that. It's, I am a non-drinker, but thank you. And saying that with confidence, I respect that a lot. Anyone that I
It's
say that,
incredible.
it's amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much. Hopefully this has been a good experience, an enriching experience. Hopefully you're all going to read up some Soren Kierkegaard, because to me it makes absolutely no sense. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.